Before we get going into your Hockey IQ podcast episode, I want to thank our sponsor, Rapid Shot. Rapid Shot is the smart shooting lane. It's like a batting cage for hockey players. Very cool. Tracks your shot in three ways: accuracy, shot speed, and reaction time. Easy to use. Actually, I used it when I played and was growing up. Very easy. Simply scan your phone in, select your settings, and start shooting. You can see your stats on the app and online. You can check them out at rapidshot.com. Great small business. I actually grew up with one of the owner's sons and have played with all the family members by now, just in local pickups here in Ohio. Very cool local business. Awesome product. I love it. I know quite a few NHLers have them in their homes. A lot of D1 programs have it at their rinks. So you have to check this out. Rapidshot.com. Check it out. Rapid Shot, thank you so much for sponsoring our podcast. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we bring on Greg Revak. What? I'm Greg Revak. Okay, so we're doing this completely different. I've got Gus Katsaros, the main man. He's back. He is going to be in charge for once. I am the interviewee, so this is going to be a fun one. So thanks again, Gus, for agreeing to hold me to the fire a little bit, since I'm always asking the questions. Now I get it turned on me.
Well, I figured that you've given enough people the ability to kind of give the world their hockey views, and I think that we should really just turn the camera around, or at least the microphone in this instance, to express your views. You give the daily detail every morning from the Hockey Arsenal. There's plenty of individual blog posts and lots of Twitter space, and there's lots of items devoted to your insight that I think is really good for the public. So I think that this really should be your moment here. So let's start with a simple concept. When I first started scouting, I would understand that there's a skill set that you're looking for players. Then there's skills that you kind of have to integrate. And players that are able to integrate their skills are going to be a little bit better than players that have individual skills, but not necessarily a good integration. And once in a while, I would just kind of see a player that his skill set was so much better, but he wasn't performing. He wasn't doing what I guess my expectation was, especially considering the type of skills that he had on the ice. And that's when I started to evolve a little bit more into systems play. Understanding how a player fits into a system and how the structure within that system can sometimes dictate how a player performs as well kind of changed the way that I assess talent. From your perspective, how would you kind of go about, how important is it to assess systems play when you're doing a bit of a scouting trip or a skills assessment on a player? And how important is it to understand where they fit into that system and structure?
Well, where my mind goes with this is just a simple phrase that role is relative. Where a player fits in with one team is not where they're likely to fit into with another team, because there's different needs, desires. There might be injuries that happen, and that role can change. When it comes to like play style, you're going to gravitate towards teams that play like your team, because those players are playing how you would like them to play. That being said, I think there's probably a bias within that, because now you're taking players that, yes, they're playing how you want, but would you be better off taking a bet on a player that is maybe hampered by the system? Their skills don't fit exactly and they're thriving anyways, because now they get put into another environment that they'll really be able to take off. So I think role is relative. And when it comes to scouting and watching players and picking them out for your team as a coach or your team as a scout, is figuring out the hampers or the things that really get them going. It's like, did they play with Crosby? Were they actually keeping up with Crosby? Maybe they're not as good as their stat line shows. something like that, or they're on a low scoring team and they're players that are very heavily hockey IQ based. Well, maybe they can't skate and dominate by themselves, but you put them with another player, suddenly their skills shine in colors and they're actually dominating games. So for me, role is relative, systems are relative, and it's a part of player development, but it can also hamper player development based on how rigid it truly can get, because you do need the concepts to increase team play and the chemistry, but there's definitely that sweet spot where you have enough structure, enough freedom. And I remember growing up, my dad had a great phrase. He's like, defense of end, that's my end. Like we do what I say. Neutral zone, we'll get some speed, whatever. Don't really care. Keep possession, look for each other. Offensive zone, that's yours. Have fun with it. Like, I'm not going to do anything. That being said, it's funny now. I've got a lot of, I let my players be free, but I do have the concepts of strong side, weak side, and I do teach offensive zone theory.
So let's kind of stay a little bit more on just systems for the moment, and considering how you just put offense and defense. Defense is pretty structured, and you can kind of put um, some kind of a playbook together to play off defensively, but you do need an element of creativity to play offensively. So let's say you're watching a team and you're trying to see just where their triggers are to how they actually are creating offense. Are you watching to try to break down the team play, or do you watch trying to, what would I do to counter whatever I'm seeing on the ice? I feel one is a good assessment. The other is when you start understanding just how I don't want to use the word easy, but I think it's a lot easier to spot how a system is being performed. But it's really, really difficult to come up with a strategy to kind of break through that system. How do you approach when you watch?
So again, I'm gonna keep going back to quotes here because I think this will be a great way to remember it. But Matt Cook, the University of Akron, was my first head coach, and I was an assistant, and he had this great phrase. He's like, Greg, you go to war with the army that you have, not the army you wish you had. And what you really get out of that is understanding, like, yes, this may be the perfect way to play against that, but do you really have the horses, the players that can execute that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So for me, when I'm doing a scout of another team, I want to know what they're trying to do. I want to know, do they have aggressive D? If they have aggressive D, that's great. I want a lot of my guys taking that puck, going to the outside, speed coming through the middle, throw an area pass, things like that. So what can we do to counteract that? Where's the space? What horses do we have? I think they're all important factors that go into how you decide how you're going to play, or the one or two items, because you can't just overload your team with all of these things. There's this background depth and knowledge that we've all as coaches come to understand that our players just simply don't have, right? They're kids. They don't know what they don't know. So you got to be able to clarify it, simplify it down into simple elements. So it might be on a power play. Okay, they're playing a box and they always pressure on the half wall. Okay, well, if that happens, do they have a guy shifting over? Usually not. So the simple play is, okay, we want to play in that space that guy is leaving. So that would be the idea for me. It's just finding simple, concise ways, and you have to find the way that works for your team. And there's plenty of examples for that. Is your team big and strong? You're playing a heavy game versus one that's fast and skilled, or is there different lines, different ways? But just finding the ability to add clarity to your players' minds, I think, is the key element when I'm looking for a pre-scout for my team. Like, here's what you're going to see. I'll let you guys come up with the solutions for your skill set, but be prepared for this cue, this cue, this cue, so they can see what it is, understand it very quickly, and be able to have a solution for it.
How often do you think you need to make adjustments in game?
Almost never. I mean, you make your adjustments in practice. I mean, if you're doing adjustments in game, it's got to be something big. Like, hey, their players stretching as soon as they one guy touched the puck, they're sending the winger out and it's going behind our strong side defenseman. Okay, well, that's a major potential issue that we need to address. But it's very rare, especially if you get to levels where every team has live barn, they're all scouting each other. Like everyone knows what's coming down the pipeline, or you've had those coaches that have coached each other for 10 years. Like, you know what's going to happen. You know how to counteract it. So for the most part, you're not making too many in-game adjustments because again, it comes back to the last one where you're not trying to add too much to your kids' brains. You want them to be playing instinctually and with clarity in their minds. If there's a big item we need to address, we'll do that. But otherwise, everything should be done in practice. Like one of my favorite coaches is Jamie Rice. He coaches Babson, D3 NCAA. Like he has no idea what his team does for warmups, like, which blows my mind because he's been there 20 plus years. Like he literally has no idea what his team does for warmups. Game day is for the players. Like that's his entire mindset. Game day is for the players. So he basically does the video pre-scout, and then he steps away until game time. And he goes behind a bench and manages the bench, but he's not making any big adjustments. Like it's just letting the kids play. And he just won, I think he did just win another conference title. Like it works.
The theory put into play. That's what you want to see. Okay. So kind of on that same point, we see a lot of, at least on the pro side, we see a lot of iPads and a lot of tablets and stuff on the bench, and players are watching their shifts and probably getting a little bit of guidance from coaches, whatever the case is. Do you think it's necessary to get that kind of detail to younger, more developing players? Maybe entering junior or entering college play, I would figure that kind of age range.
I know a coach, his name's Al Ramsey. We'll get him on the podcast at some point. Actually, I already got him agreed to it, so he'll definitely be on soon. And he's got kids that are mites and squirts. I think that's 8U and 10U now. They've changed all the numbers on me, but he literally he'll like iPad a shift for a line, and he'll give the iPad to the kids, 8-9 years old, and they absolutely love it. Like, I don't know if you've ever watched yourself play hockey, but the first time you do it, it's just an absolutely mind-shattering experience. And you're like, oh my God, what am I doing out here? If I was coaching me, we would have some issues. Like, it's hilarious. So I'm a big proponent of watching your own shifts. Some kids only watch it for their own highlights, which at least they're watching some. but watching back and like, what else could I have done? Like that was big for me. And as I was getting into coaching, that's when Live Barn became a thing. We could actually have access to video. That's when I started doing it for my own men's league experience or adult league experience, for doing like, if I was a player, how would I take this? What would my thought process be? And trying to put myself in their shoes. So I would say that I am probably the best player I've ever been now than I ever was, because I've actually broken my own shifts down, which now I'm a little jealous of all these kids because they can pull it like it's tomorrow and almost have an overload of video. But yeah, I definitely put more video in kids' hands, and it'd be less on highlights and more on full sequences and what led to this happening.
So I'm going to twist this just a little bit. Would it be more important? Maybe this isn't the right way to describe it, because there should really be a healthy balance here. But for kids, is it easier to show them the visuals of a video or something where they can see themselves or somebody emulating the type of play you expect out of them on their course of development? Or is it to show them that you can measure their development using some analytics? Is it just the concept of bringing both together? Or do you feel one may have a more significance than the other?
The other side of this that we're slightly leaving out is the time that it takes to do a lot of that.
Absolutely. And the effort is Herculean in nature. So I get that.
Yeah. So there are micro stats that you can pull. Like for my teams, I have a puck touch sheet. Heck, I even saw it on Gumroad these days. But basically the idea of, did your puck touch lead to something good or not? Do you need stats for it? Probably not. Do I think it's more powerful? Definitely. And I think that ultimately, that is the ultimate reason why I do. I think it's more powerful. You can see game over game. How did it go? You can see trends happening. When you tell a player that their positive puck touches was 30%, so, like, I remember doing that to a player. I'm like, so the last 3 games, you've got about a 34% chance of making a good hockey play and that not leading to a turnover or a problem that was passed to a teammate. As soon as I sent that, I was like 2 seconds later, he pops back. Thanks, coach. Had no idea. I'm going to go watch the video. I'm like, perfect. It's exactly the response I was hoping for. I did not even need to ask. Like, he just did it on his own. Like, I was just letting him know, like, hey, we need to be making better decisions. And he came with a desire of like, all right, I want to look into like what's happening out there. So that was really, really fascinating. But I think it's based on what you have available. What time do you have? Like, I don't have any kids. I got a few more hours in the day than most. So I can probably go a little deeper, but it's the idea of where you're heading. Like, you can do all of this stuff extremely simple, extremely cheap. We like to get too much sometimes into the science, I would say, and just sometimes the tried and true stuff's already there. Just relax, have fun with it.
So if you're having trouble getting through to a player, is there a coach Revak method, or is it really just an individual case by case and just trying to diagnose a specific problem or a way to break through the ideas that you would like to pass on?
I think my players would all say I'm a bit of a brainiac. If you're going to try to out
see that.
reason Coach Revak, you're probably going to lose. So I don't have too many of those. The only time I struggle to get through players is usually, and I hate to say this because I think parents are some of the greatest supporters and greatest elements of the game, is it sometimes starts in the home and the kids are just out of their minds and it starts in the home. Anyone who's come from a situation where they've had to either be self-reliant or they have great parents or whatever it may be, never had any issues. And it's just being honest with them. Like, that's really what we want. We want clarity. We want to know where we stand. We want to know why we're doing well, what the coach is looking for. Like, I never want a kid thinking in the gray of like, I'm not sure where we're at on this. So I've only had one player in my entire coaching career where I've been like, we should probably get rid of this guy. I keep giving him chances after chance. After a while, I'm like, all right, we're done. We kept him around. We finally went to like playoffs. He didn't see a bunch of ice because he took a bunch of dumb penalties, just being a hothead and similar from the dad. And eventually he just quit. Playoff time, right? He just quit. I'm like, lesson learned. Get rid of it earlier, because if it doesn't solve itself early, and being able to get through and being open and honest, you're never going to be open and honest with yourself, and it just leads to friction elsewhere. But no, for me, it's just right. Just be like, here's what the situation is. Here's what you want. Half the time it's just get better. Here's some things to work on. Provide the clarity. Provide the consistent communication. That's where I see most coaches go wrong, is they don't have enough communication with the parents, the players, etc. At the older ages, it's much more on the players, and you can rope in the parents here and there. But the younger ages, definitely the parents. Like, an 8-year-old doesn't know. He's just having fun out there. Parents, they need a little more coaching, especially like I'm in Columbus. There's a lot of parents that have never been hockey parents before. I mean, some of them have been ex-Ohio State athletes. They kind of get the idea, but you don't know what you don't know. And I don't like to blame it on the parents. I like to educate. The education doesn't work. Maybe it's not meant to be. We need to move on here.
Well, that's actually part of the game. It's kind of ingrained, right? You have a new generation. Like, I kind of think about it a bit from when I was growing up. We had a more immigrant style or split in the population. So you had a lot of people that were being introduced to hockey, a lot of kids that really didn't have parents that kind of supported the idea of playing hockey. Now I think what you're seeing is every kid plays, or at least they have the ability to do so. The skill sets are getting so much better. And now I think that that's kind of prevalent in the relationships that you have from these parents that are not just or first generation hockey people, they're the second generation, even if they didn't play themselves. So now they've gained some insight from whatever they've learned throughout their entire life, and they want to present that wisdom to their kids. And then you have coaches that also have other influence too. I can understand how the message could easily be jumbled between the parents' message and coaching messages. How do you deal with something like that?
Just consistent, like consistency. I mean, I'm a terrible marketer. I think I put out half decent content, but I don't feel like I'm the best marketer out there. I steal pieces here and there, but it's the same thing. Like consistency is the ultimate marketing hack. So like just being there every day. Here's what it is. Here's how it is. And the access to information today is so great. The ability to discern, especially from a newer person, between good and bad is very hard. So for me, it's like, how do we help get people to understand what's good versus what's bad? How do you discern that? Like, I'm in financial advising. I'm a financial advisor. Like, talk about something that is unbelievably difficult to quantify the value of. And they always do studies, and everyone shows that investment performance is one of the least ways to actually get your return on this. Like, it's through the planning, the tax, whether it be tax planning, estate planning, or my personal favorite, just behavioral finance, like just helping investors not do anything stupid. And it's like the same things with hockey. Like, just helping you not do anything stupid is like the best thing we could do for you. But it's so hard because, like, how do you know a good coach from a bad? Everyone says they're a development coach. We focus on development here. Okay. Everyone says they're a financial advisor. Okay. It's like, well, what's good, what's bad? How do you know? So for me, trying to be consistent, truly be about development, and let the product speak for itself as much as possible, and just provide a good quality experience where people are excited to come to the rink. They're excited to be on your team. I think that's the ultimate for me.
So I think that consistency is a very important point, and especially for good habits and good habit forming. When you have a player that's kind of slumping, do you push just keep doing the things that are bringing you success, the good habits, or do you try something different to put them into a different comfort zone, or like, how do you help a player that you know is slumping? What type of ideas would you try to give them?
Yeah, it's again clarity, and I think coaching is so much about giving clarity of, like, even if you're doing the wrong thing, at least you're doing the thing. Like, you really don't know. I like to think I've studied enough to know what the right direction is, but it's the same idea of, like, they do it, kids do it, and let me back this up ever so slightly. There's a difference between the input and the output. So there's that matrix, right? You can make the right decision and it works out. Everyone loves that. Everyone knows that's good feedback. You could do the right thing and it doesn't work out. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if I'm going to keep doing that. Then you got the opposite. You do the wrong thing and it works out. You think you're a genius. Really, you're just lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Do the wrong thing, you get the wrong output. Usually you can learn. So it's like the false positives of, you did the right thing, it didn't work out. But was your decision-making process putting you in the right place, the right time to eventually get lucky? Like, how are you putting the odds? And I was a bit of a poker player in my childhood. My parents eventually were like, you probably shouldn't play this anymore, because I was beating all the little kids. But like, I was thinking in probabilities, and it was the same thing with hockey of, like, how do I find my way into high probability areas? How do I increase shot percentage? Like, I've definitely been yelled at by teammates, like, you can shoot, right? Like, yeah, but if I hit the back door, the shooting percentage jumps to like 60%. I've got maybe like 20 here. Like, even if I fail once or twice, like, it's still, no, it's fine. So having discussions around the process, and are we putting ourselves in areas to be lucky, to cash in on the odds, And eventually it's going to happen. At that point, it's the law of large numbers. You do it enough, it pays off. It was like the Leafs earlier this season. Like, no one remembers it, but that opening few games of where they just couldn't win. But you saw, maybe the first few games were like, but you saw those 4 games before they like truly started to take off. You're like, you could see the process was so good. It was only a matter of time. And for coaches, it's the same thing on when they're winning and the habits are going, they're not doing good routes, and that's for any team. So that's when you hear the coach is like, yeah, we won tonight, but we got a lot of things, because the coach doesn't care about the win or the loss. They care about the game after this. And are we trending in the right direction? Are we getting better? Are we doing things that are going to eventually lead to sustained success, or at least give ourselves the best odds? Like, hockey, people don't realize how much luck goes into it. It's one of those sports where it's a little bit more on the luck spectrum rather than the be good spectrum. So for me, it's how do we put ourselves into good spots more consistently? Funneling to the net would be a prime example. You funnel the net as the puck's going there, or able to get backdoor passes as you're funneling. Like, that's a massive thing. How do you take routes into pucks? Are you coming through the middle? Are you tracking back consistently? All these things that add up to sustained success, things that are going to give you that consistently. Not always, but majority of the time are going to lead to good things. Like, that's for me where I want it going. So when we're talking about slumping players, it's about, okay, are you doing the right things to increase your luck? Are you doing the things to give yourself looks? Like, it's not a problem if you're not finishing. It's a problem if you're not getting the looks to finish.
So let's kind of turn it a little bit. The play used to be get the puck to the point, get point shots, and then get to the front of the net, get some rebounds, try to get some traffic. You remember that old style idea, right? Because right now, at least the point in the offensive zone is more of a release valve than a strategical point. I'm going to stop talking and just let you go from there.
Yeah, point shots suck. Let's be honest here. Like, the sheer odds, and that's one of my favorite pieces I wrote. Like, I've told
it was
people
fantastic. It was fantastic, Greg.
I appreciate it. I've had people tell me that I should change the name and I have more like Google results come up. I'm like, I refuse. Like, it's the perfect name. Point shots suck, because they do. They're really terrible on many, many layers. If your coach, sorry, Philadelphia fans, I'm going to you're the most visual experience to me. When your coach starts doing point shots, I think Haxtell was the guy who did it. Like, you just knew the results eventually going to fall off, because they're not increasing the luck area. They're actually taking away from it. And my favorite part is, like, people always tell you, like, okay, we're doing it for more rebounds. We're doing it for tips. And you look in the data, and that is not how that works. Like, the defensive, like, for offensive standpoint, you're about a 40% puck retrieval. Like, so you shoot it, you got about a 40% chance of getting it back. Okay. You got about a 3% chance of scoring. It's like, that's my favorite is when the playoffs happen, because it gets, gritty at the net and everyone's like, oh yeah, point shots. And there's enough games that those stats end up working out. So people will give me, especially my brother, for whatever reason, will give me, videos of point shots working in a game. Like, oh yeah, 3 out of the 4 were point shots. And the goals. Just know it's the numbers work out. But yeah, like, they truly do stink. And you're absolutely right. It's a release valve. I'm not sure how many people are going to be able to remember this or even think about this, because it's classic, but I think you and I will be able to relate to this. The old cycle game, where you pull it out of the corner, you walk up. Most teams are not cutting the top with just putting the winger on the wall, so you can't make that pass. So every team would literally get it in, would go from low to high. So from the corner, you're walking, you're making that pass to the point. That point goes D to D, shot at the net, because that gives enough time for everyone to follow the net, and hopefully you get some rebounds, tips, garbage goals, whatever. And we just don't see it anymore, until I saw the Ohio State women's team play, which they're number 1 in the nation. So, they've got some unbelievable athletes, absolute animals. They're awesome. And they played the cycle game. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is the number 1, number 2 team in the land playing the cycle game. I'm like, this takes me back to the mid 2000s. I mean, I literally haven't seen this in the mid 2000s because every team has figured out that point shots suck, except for the few teams that do it. And then eventually they're fired, their coach gets fired. Montreal Canadiens, another example. Like, it's only a matter of time because they truly do suck. So getting back to the subject here on why they're awful, it's just the terrible shot recovery. The tips really don't work. The shots don't go in. Yes, they do happen. So don't at me on that one. But the release valve is the key here. So how do we create offense off that? Usually you're drawing in players, passing off to someone sliding in that middle area, doing give and goes, activating. I did a study, and again, it's another one of these pieces that people tell me I should change the name on, and this one I probably should, but it's how does Zach Werenski score goals? He led the league, I think it was 19-20 season in scoring. And how did he do it? So I was looking at every single goal that he scored, a lot of the shot chances beyond it, but I didn't track that, just the goals. Like, how does he score? And it was a fascinating piece, like almost no point shots. Now, Zach Werenski's not the fastest guy. Great hands, good deception, big body, but he's constantly attacking downhill. He's finishing his routes on the rush. He's finishing his routes through the offensive zone. He's passing and going, and he's consistently finding ways to get better shot quality, put himself into a better spot. So that was something I found, and I know friends like Daryl Belfry have talked about skating downhill, point shots suck, and activating the zone are huge. And the best defensemen, if you go look at all the scoring leaders, are all the exact same way. And they're not just chucking point shots at the net. They're not playing the old cycle game anymore. And if your team is, I would be very worried. Unless you're Carolina, in which case Eric Tolsky's backing everything up.
You got the complete data points on that. It's actually kind of funny, but I had 2, I'll call them aha moments while I was scouting. One was the integration into systems and structure and trying to see where players kind of fit along that route. The second was, when the analytics started gaining more prominence, the biggest, I'll call it argument, counter argument, was how it was going to replace scouting, how it was going to replace somebody watching a game and being able to do a proper assessment. To me, I never really felt that. To me, I felt that there were concepts that were driven by studies that would change the game. This concept of point shots suck is one of the offshoots of that. So instead of just saying, well, these are the numbers and posting a chart or something, there's practicality in the ideas from these studies that you can integrate on a game-to-game basis or on a more wide-scale basis. So do you think that the studies that you've had and the analysis, and sometimes it's just so overkill that it's difficult to start putting more of these ideas into play? How do you try to bring more of these concepts into the work that you do, and then to try to integrate them into your team concepts as well?
So I have actually a packet that I used with my team starting 5 years ago.
Okay.
About 5 years ago. And I call it the statistical advantage. So I took all of the studies at the time. So this would have been 2015 or 16, I think 2016, when I started doing this. So I was taking all these studies off like hockey graphs or whatnot and trying to find situations where we could use the data towards team play. Like, how do you play a 2-on-1? Like that. If you let that pass through, what is that percentage chance of goal? How do we want to play that? Like, do we give the goalie the shooter? Do we want to make them pass early? And some of the stuff filters into some of my pieces. Like, I think I put in the 2-on-1, how to play that. Point shots suck. Definitely use that. But like, there's data that is good. Like, you don't need to do it yourself. You don't need to be anything super complex, but there's lots of great data out there in the public sphere that can help just optimize, or at least lead towards a more optimized strategy. Like, you don't want to just do the same exact thing over and over again. That was what's killing me with the Leafs early this season. I was like, dude, at some point you got to take a terrible shot, because you at least got to throw the goalie's timing off. Like, there's that element of it, but at least you're getting in the right direction. So like that for me is what I used to do, and I still do. And I have that piece. I just need to update it with modern day studies. But yeah, you got any follow-ups on that? I can take this many different ways.
There's so many different ideas that I think that just because the amount of people that are studying the game, and now you have data engineers and data scientists that are producing more data. One of my favorites is actually Corey Schneider, who just does all the microstat tracking.
Yeah,
and I know that you could do a lot more sophisticated things, but for the public and the amount of insight that you can get from those microstats, just having somebody do that work makes the ideas that come out of all of that analysis just that much more robust.
Yes. And I actually started, and it was really early before he got hired away, with Scott Tierney. I forget what his website used to be called.
Sean Tierney. It was what was that website?
I'm trying to remember. It was great. Anyways, he had fantastic work, and he was super in depth. And I was like, there's no way. And he was an early Hockey IQ podcast guest. So I was talking with him about this. I'm like, this would be a fantastic project that we could do. So someone's going to probably steal this, but like, you can round up all of these studies, like breakout percentages. Like, you could find someone who found out, okay, what percentage with a reverse leads to a possession breakout? How much of that leads to a turnover? Just like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you're getting in the right direction. You're thinking about the game in a more probabilistic way. Like, you can phase this in, like, how would you play based on the book X, Y, and Z? So for me, it was like breakout plays. And that was part of my statistical advantage. It's like, okay, well, what's really successful? Reverse plays, wheel plays. So if you got the wheel and you can go straight up, do it. If you don't have it, we're reversing. Like, those are great plays. What's terrible? Rimming the puck. Some of this stuff's very obvious, and research 80, probably 90% of the time is like, yeah, just confirm what I already knew. But like, these are some things that you can log into your team's DNA a little bit, and pull from. So those are like the stats that I would always talk about with my players, is how do we increase this? How do we increase shot quality? I don't know how to properly do this, because it definitely has its issues, but like, the power play behind the net is super valuable. Like, how do you do that within movement? Because a good team, I mean, the NHL is a little bit different because they're all freaks and everyone watches each other and they all know how to pressure properly. Like, it's very hard to do that in the NHL, but a power play behind the goal line from a youth team is very difficult. The goalie's stuck on the goal line. They really don't shoulder check that well. Like, they can't close down the space as fast. Like, it's super effective. Then you get your NHL, which is terrible to go. Like, as soon as you go towards the corner, like, every team's pressuring you. You're kind of pinned in. Like, it's really tough. But if you can find ways to pass it down, go around, like, Columbus had a bunch of success with that the other year. Like, Jones would come in from the right point and you just lay a clap bomb on the net. Like, there's different ways that you can put this into a team play. I just think the idea is we want to be less wrong. We're not trying to be so much right, but we want to test things out and try to be less wrong each day. And it's the same thing with, like, we want to have possession on, and this is another thing I have in my queue of Idea Bank, and my Idea Bank, the Hockey IQ newsletter, grows much faster than my writing ability does. So if anyone's out there wants to write my articles for me,
we're all looking for
I have plenty for you. Yeah, plenty of ideas. But I just think that we can use the analytics to help our eye test. Like, everyone knows things that work well, that don't work well. They might work at this level, not this level, etc. And how do we help shape that with the Army we do have, not the Army we wish we had. I mean, you can try to build it a little bit. It's part of player development, but yeah, I think it's just so much fun to try to take all of this stuff that's a little bit of the wild, wild west still and formulate it in. And like my biggest, I guess, I don't know if it's like, it's the best way to phrase this, but just like proudest moment was like seeing every single year that I coached between when we started the year versus where we ended the year, we always grew on teams. It's like, if I'm comparing myself as a coach, like there's those teams you play like 4 or 5 times, like those are like the stake games. Like where am I currently in the progress? Like, am I gaining on this guy? Am I like actually making progress? Am I staying around the same? Like, how am I growing my players compared to him or her? So like, I think this was a big way that I did it, was trying to just like help my kids play the odds better. Obviously their skill development goes into that, but just like, how do you tactically approach that?
So I'm going to give you a 2-part question here. How do you come up with a concept like the left-handed player's cheat code? And is this something that you consciously tell everyone, or like how did you come up with that? Is that just something that was information relayed to you, or are there studies or anything behind that as well?
So my brother is a goalie, so I've had many discussions with him about like what's hard for him, and then I've gone into the net and I've figured out like what's hard for me. And I had a player who had a fantastic shot, couldn't really skate that well. I mean, his footwork was fine, but like it was just clunky. And it was more so from foot speed more than anything. Like the footwork was okay. And he was a lefty, and he put so much downforce, and he ripped this shot, and he always would put it off the glass, and just he sprayed it everywhere. And I'm like, dude, start shooting low. Shooters go low. And for him, I was like, I'm trying to find a way for it to click with him, like stop shooting high. So I literally be like, dude, this is your cheat code. You're going to go low every time. So I just nicknamed it for him, the left-hander's cheat code. And I was like, this is just great marketing for other players. Like, oh yeah, it's my cheat code. Like, who doesn't love the, PlayStation, finding that cheat code and being able to, do anything and everything.
It perks their interest. Yep.
Exactly. So like it stuck with their mind. It's the same way where we started with some quotes here. I think it just, and I didn't realize how powerful it was. And I was literally 2 weeks ago, I was listening on North Carolina women's coach. It's like Dorn Ansem or something like that is his name. And they have like 12 pillars of their culture, and each one has a quote. And if you've ever studied memory and memory champs, like the way that they remember this, or however, whatever it is, however long it is through stories. And like quotes, stories, those kinds of things are what allow us to remember things. Like memories are super powerful, but they need to be associated with some kind of story, some kind of quote, some kind of element. So there's that power of the language. And I always laugh because they always talk about Bill Belichick. There's like, yeah, he's whatever we've come up with today, like he knows about it just by another name from 50 years ago. And I'm like, I'm trying not to get too much of that, but just like have enough language that sticks with players that they can happen. Like, are you a 7-Eleven? Like every kid knows that 7-Eleven's open 24/7. Like it's open all the time. So of course, like how do you peak and make them remember things and create that fun, memorable experience where they're learning, they're having fun, and they're going to remember these things. And that was the left-hand cheat code. How the name happened. How I picked that out was I was talking to my brother, and we were just talking about like, you worry so much, especially at like the AAA level or the higher levels, because these players understand the pushing and how the 5-hole opens and closes, that you're so worried about your stick positioning. And when you're worried about your stick positioning and 5-hole and how you're about to push, you often forget about your blocker, or your blocker is just naturally slow because you're holding the stick. Now the glove, many elements that go into that, a little bit different, but with the fact that you're holding your stick, now you've got a heavy object in your hand. You're worried about how am I holding my stick so I make sure I don't leave any of the 5-hole open. So now you've got this little space that occurs because you've got to keep your hand up just a little bit higher. So that spot just over that pad, truly, I believe, is a little bit of a cheat code. Now, it's the same thing with righties on the glove side, or if you're, we're stereotyping our goalies, so they're all left-hand catches, but like the right-hand side for righties, the left-hand side for lefties, it's just a little more powerful with the lefties due to the fact that it's the blocker, you're holding it. But it definitely works both ways.
I had a friend that would describe certain areas on goaltenders like that, that little spot in the Death Star that, it was just impregnable. But that one shot, that one lucky shot that Luke got, that did it all. And a goaltending assessment is actually a weakness of mine, so I've never really worked on it. I don't research. I'd never really tried to get any better on it. But is that kind of how you approach certain things? Do you look at it from the perspective of the goaltender, and how can we make them move a certain way? You've often mentioned, like a pass across the Royal Road increases your shooting percentage, and those are plays that you want to do. You're trying to break the goaltender's stance somehow. Is that how you approach kind of some of your offensive ideas?
So I approach pretty much all of my ideas. It's like, what is the exact opposite, right? Like, you want to generate more offense. Okay, well, what is the pain in the ass for the defense? Like, what are they struggling with? What it makes, like, there's this great soccer quote, and I've been toiling on how to tweet this or put it in the IQ newsletter. Like, and it comes from soccer. It's like, you've got to make the defense make decisions. Like, are you challenging them to make decisions? That's the concept. Like, you want to make them do things that they don't want to do, or they've been trained not to do. For example, how do you get them to cross their feet? Things like that.
Exactly.
So for me, yeah, I'm always starting with the exact opposite. Whatever I'm trying to accomplish, I start with the exact opposite. Like, how would this be really difficult for the other person? Because at the end of the game, we're actually competing against someone else. This isn't swimming where you just have to worry about your lane, your technique, your breathing, your endurance, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you have someone else who's trying to stop you. You need to know the cues. You need to know what's difficult for them. And it's the same reason why, when in doubt, just throw it in the goalie's feet. Like, if you've ever played goalie for a half second, you know how difficult it is. Like, there's a reason why the butterfly was invented, because on ice shots are unbelievably difficult. The butterfly solved a lot of the issues. There's still problems that cannot be solved with a butterfly, though. And I think that's fascinating. So that would be my word, is like, invert whatever you're thinking of, like the exact opposite. Rather than thinking, what can I do? How can I make them make decisions? How can I put them in a place where they make a choice, and whatever it is, it's the wrong one, I have an answer for it. It's the same way. And I've used this many times with players. It's literally the Mighty Ducks movie. D3, when Charlie Conway gets put back on defense, make him make the first move, Conway. If you're the one making the first decision, you're losing. So how can you put them to make that decision first? How can you put them in situations where they have to choose? And you got to ask questions of the defense. You have to ask the questions of the defense. Absolutely ask the questions. If you don't ask the questions, you're never going to be able to create or generate.
That force to pivot is one of my pivotal messages way back in the day, based on Jake Gardner alone, because you knew that once that guy started the pivot, he was done. You could have been the slowest skater ever. You knew, though, once that movement, and it kind of plays off the idea that you're a big proponent of playing off the heels. I think that's a very valuable idea.
Yes, pivots is one of the there's a few items that it's very, very large between the novice and the expert, and pivoting is one of them. The ability that the NHL players play at with their pivots is unrealistic for the rest of hockey. Like, if you go watch a high school game, even juniors, like, some of the players have figured out because they're actually getting the coaching, but like, unbelievable. The guys that can't pivot or have had hip mobility, like Jake Gardner, that was my problem with him. Like, he's a good player. Like, he actually brings a lot to the table. Big fan. But yeah, his pivoting is just atrocious. Like he can't open his hips up all the way. He always loses a step. A lot of times he's pivoting off his outside edge. It's just rough. Like a really good player to watch on this. Victor Hedman's pretty good. McDonough's really good. McDonough's really good at being able to stay with guys. Nick Lidstrom's obviously the master, but he doesn't play anymore. But just watch the guys down in Tampa Bay. They're quite good at it. But yeah, hip mobility is just absolutely massive. And I was watching and talking with Ryan Hardy and their guy. I think it was Bobby Lucas was his name. They're doing gym work, and literally that's one of the big key items is hip mobility, ability to open your hip up, and a lot of it has to do with skating, the ability to skate, how do you shift weight, how do you pivot, all of that kind of stuff in the critical element. It's one of those key pieces and core tenets for me is hip mobility. Should be done you should be able to train that at the younger ages. For me, it's super critical through puberty as your body's changing and the range of motion and how you keep it. But I've heard many old coaches say, and they're not wrong, I don't think they had the scientific knowledge and it really wasn't available. Just like, it's all about getting kids to open and pivot and move their hips constantly. As long as they're moving their hips. And like, that was the key element for like their skating. And I'm like, spot on. Like, yeah, you can spice it up more if you want, but absolutely true. That is by far a major hurdle you still see even at older ages. And it truly does hold players back. I mean, Jake Gardner could have been much, much better if he ever learned how to pivot. And even when he did learn how to pivot, it was probably too late for his body and how it was shaped and developed.
So I'm going to this is going to be the last question, but Jake Gardner is one of the prime examples I also use of a player that grew up playing as a forward, but then was converted into a defenseman closer to the professional levels. So there's an institutional amount of knowledge that you gain by playing a certain position, a defenseman in particular, that you just don't get by changing from a forward into a defenseman. Pivoting is one. Contact is another, the force of contact, the ability to kind of transition the play. It's a very different mentality of being a defenseman than it is being a forward. We're kind of getting into that era where we're seeing a lot more total hockey and there's a lot more structural fluidity and less center, right wing, left wing, more F1, F2, F3. So how do you think we're going to be approaching the game as a total hockey kind of concept starts to creep in? And I tend to think that we need to start giving players the ability to play all of these positions in like the single digit ages, the 8, 9, and perhaps even 10-year-olds. Am I often thinking that we should start at that level?
You're spot on. I find this debate to be very interesting because I've talked to people from NHL, ex-NHL guys giving back, doing their own programming. I've talked to USA Hockey about this. And a lot of people are all over the board on it. But the best arguments I have heard are the ones for more positionless hockey. Even Scotty Bowman at the NHL literally would do practices where defense were forwards were defense. Everyone played everything. And I mean, Sergei Fedorov was able to go from a forward to defense in the NHL. But you do see, like you said, there is institutional knowledge you need to kind of have and grow and develop. Rasmus Dahlin would be a perfect example. Like, he did not become a defenseman full-time until basically his draft year. Absolutely insane. Guy went first overall, literally hadn't really played defense. He just played hockey. And you can see the versatility he has. And I think if he was in Colorado, that we would be talking about him like we do talk about Makar right now. And vice versa. Like, Makar would be in Buffalo. You try being in that system with, you're talented. You can see the moments, but dude, getting shelled every night, like for 2-3 straight years. Like, geez, Dahlin impressed me with the mental strength he has. But I'm one to shift everyone to every position. Every player that's kicked and screamed as they do it has always come back eventually, be like, all right, I really appreciate it. I do see the game much different, much better now. And they do get a ton out of it. I've only had one player ever be like, you're not going back to you're not meant for that position. Like, that's it. Like, nope. not for you. I'm sorry. And actually, I fought for a lot of players in their high school careers to change positions because they got pigeonholed at a young age and their skill set was not meant for that position. And I think that's massive. I think they're it was funny. It was a player I told him for three straight years. I'm like, dude, you're a forward. Why are you playing D? I'd always tell him, go forward, go forward, go forward. He'd play forward in spring league because I randomly had the spring league that I was just coaching. And you just throw basically. There's a bunch of teams that rotate and you get on a bench and I get them every once in a while. I'm like, dude, you're playing forward today. He scored like 2-3 goals. I'm like, dude, why do you keep going back? And then he literally got pigeonholed. So in his high school year would come around, he gets scored on a ton. He can't really pivot. He's got a great shot. He's got some good puck protection skills. So like couldn't play defense to save his life. The awareness really wasn't there. Like I think we underestimate how personality plays into maybe like a propensity for a role. Like if you're like a big brother type, protect your guys, like usually those players are much better at defense. They have the awareness of like everything going around. I need to protect this guy and protect that. And here's the space, things like that. But there is massive benefits, and you just have to look at the Patriots to players that are versatile. Everyone wants to play a 2-3 or a third guy high. So you basically got 3 defensemen out there. Your ability also from not having a position or being fluid as a player makes you more valuable to a team because you can play any position at any time. You can play any role. You can go up and down a lineup. Now you're making yourself more valuable. And now you're able to see more situations and allow what I call, again, that luck surface area to kind of be hit. And you're giving yourself the opportunities that may not be there otherwise. So I think that's massive. To answer maybe the back end question, the game is definitely going towards like do your next door neighbor's job. So if you're a weak side defenseman, your next door neighbor's center, you pick up his job, he does yours, and those kind of things are a leap. And I would definitely say that there's some teams that have taken some much larger leaps, but everyone's getting there. I mean, every single team is going to have the weak side defenseman joining the rush. I mean, Yossi won a Norris with it. I mean, he's a great player, but won a Norris trophy by being the weak side defenseman joining the rush every funny puck he's going. So it's going to be a requirement, and you're doing your players a disservice if you're a coach or parent if you're not having them play multiple positions. And players, if you're not doing it, you're doing yourself a disservice by not playing multiple positions, and you're limiting your opportunities going forward.
I think that this is a very fascinating topic, probably something that you can devote an entire podcast to, because the ideas that kind of sprout out of this could just kind of go in every different direction. So I appreciate the answer that you kind of provided to that. So I'm going to ask you 2 last questions, and they're very, very easy. 1, what are you reading right now? And 2, where can we read all your work?
What am I reading right now? There's a fascinating book that just got put out, and it's not really a book. It's How to Skate a 10K, and it's absolutely free. The gentleman who was a speed skater, I'm trying to remember his name, Niels, it's like Vanderpool. I'll pull this up real quick. Yep, Niels Vanderpool. Absolutely fascinating. Just finished it. And it was all about how his training methods were completely different than everyone else's, how he went about it, how he thought about things. Absolutely fascinating. The second piece that I've read recently that I think was absolutely fascinating, also free, Daryl Belfry put out a piece on the European Coalition. Wrote about that a little bit on the Hockey IQ newsletter. Both of those two are just fascinating pieces on development, mindset, how we go about creating environments, how do we go about creating players that can think the game at a high level, and how do we actually approach these things, not just the theory, but actually how would you go about it, phasing, suboptimal, to then push forward in progressions. Like, it's fascinating stuff. So those would be the 2 that I would suggest people check out at this point. We do on hockeysarsenal.com have a book rec. So book recommendations from past guests. Highly suggest the Inner Game of Tennis. I think that might be my favorite book of all time.
Really interesting. Okay.
Really, really good. really good. I'm a numbers guy and very rational, and it was the exact opposite. So it was kind of a absolute game changer in shifting how I thought about how people learn and develop. And yeah, we don't have it any other way. I'll throw that one out there. It's the actual book that you have to pay for. It might be out there. It's been out long enough. I think it was out in 80. I was probably back in, say, like 73, maybe, way back in the day. But absolutely fantastic reading.
Well, there you have it, folks. If you want to get better hockey knowledge, read a tennis book.
Yeah. I'm a big soccer guy, so I haven't found any good books, but that one was fantastic about it. I think soccer is a fascinating place to read the game of hockey because it's, for the most part, the same movement patterns, but on a much bigger area, and you can't go as fast. So you can really see how these things develop in a much more controlled environment. Obviously, I tried to go on Twitter each day at Coach Revak, at Hockey's Arsenal, post a clip or two. But myself, I learned a lot from the soccer field, and then it becomes super obvious on a hockey rink. So yeah, absolutely. So the second part to your question, where to find me, Hockey IQ newsletter. You're obviously already on the Hockey IQ podcast. Check out the newsletter. Gus and I will start with Point Shots Suck as being the first place to go.
Yep.
My favorite piece to write, though, I have to say, was the curious movement of Chandler Stevenson. We're looking at how I think he handcuffed Mark Stone on one of the goals that Montreal scored in the playoffs last year. And I think that was fantastic. The puck acquisition one was good. That was kind of based off my dad's advice when I was a kid, of always be able to be seen as soon as your teammate picks their head up. Like, simple advice, but how do you go about it? I think that's a fascinating thought process and how to go down. So find me on Twitter. That's where I'm most active. We do have Facebook and Instagram, but you won't get the depth of it. Twitter's where to find us. But no, highly suggest the Hockey IQ newsletter. That would be the ultimate place. I think that's where the best, most in-depth breakdowns are. But Twitter can always be fun, and little nuances you just pick up each and every day. It's that 1% better type stuff. Yeah, I also do some writing over at the coach's site. That's more premium content. We'll see if we can broker a deal. I might be over at their, I want to say it's June or July 25th, giving a presentation at their conference up in Michigan.
Nice. Those conferences are always really, really great. So, well, Coach, it's been great having you on your own podcast. I think it's a long time coming. And you know what? I don't know whether or not I'm not a very good host or anything. I'm sure if you brought somebody else that had a different nuance to this, perhaps it is something that you should do once again. You have a lot of knowledge that I think you can impart to the general population. This is a great medium for you to be able to do that, not just from your guests, but for your insight as well.
One, thanks for doing this. Two, I really appreciate it. Three, I think you may have inspired me. I might have to go out to Twitter and throw it out there. If anyone wants to be a podcast host for a day, we'll keep this going, and that'll be the Q&A. It could be a fun time.
You could think about it. It's a great idea.
See, you're always making me think. I always appreciate talking with you. I always feel better and even more knowledgeable than I started. And I'm like, just when I think I'm hitting the 1% better each day, apparently I'm going 2% better. So thanks again. Really appreciate you doing this.
My pleasure, man.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch you beauts here next week for a brand new episode.